Welcome to Introduction to Psychology with Polly. This is Module 2, Biology of Behavior. We're now going to continue our discussion about the organization of the nervous system. Recap from the previous discussion, we talk about the neural conduction and the synaptic transmission. The neural conduction is referring to the action potential or the signal within the neuron where you have your above the threshold negative 55 millivolts. And then when that threshold is met, the sodium ion channels will open and it will lead to entrance of the sodium ions inside the intracellular space of the axon. And then it will positively charge further the intracellular space. And then this is what we call the depolarization. And then it will compensate. We will call it the repolarization when it will go back to its negative 70 millivolts as its resting potential state. But it will also have its resting state where it has hyperpolarization. By that time, we cannot entertain another action potential. In the synaptic transmission, we are referring to the movement of the chemicals, particularly the neurotransmitters. Movement of these chemicals from one synapse, the presynaptic cell, and then to another postsynaptic receiving cell. In this event, the neurotransmitter is moving from one neuron to another. The neurons are communicating chemically through the neurotransmitters. It will depend on the functionality or classification of the neurotransmitter, whether it is an inhibitor or an excitatory type of neurotransmitter, whether it will promote whether it will promote action potential or inhibit it. So now let's move on to the neurotransmitter. Actually, in your reference, in our main reference, it did not mention the different types of neurotransmitters. So this is just one of many neurotransmitters that you can find, but you will encounter this in your biopsych course. So this is just some of them. We are referring to GABA and the glutamate as the most prominent inhibitors and excitatory neurotransmitters. GABA, you might imagine it being the main inhibitory neurotransmitter as you can imagine being relaxed or being calm. And then for glutamate, as a major excitatory neurotransmitter, you can imagine an image opposite to GABA. Let's say, for example, in this table, we are referring to having a seizure when we have an oversupply of glutamate neurotransmitter. Another interesting neurotransmitter is the acetylcholine. This is responsible mostly in the learning process. You will encounter that in your biopsych when you're talking about learning in the long term. So there will be a lot of movements between the neurons with regards to how the acetylcholine is being received by its receptors. For the dopamine and serotonin, I think these two are the most popular ones, the most popular neurotransmitters. For the dopamine, we are referring to when we are referring to the reward system of the brain, especially on the topic of motivation. The dopamine neurotransmitter is highly associated with reward and also learning and motivation. When we sense something that is highly stimulating, highly rewarding to our senses, the dopamine is firing and we can process this pleasure experience and anticipation through the transmission of dopamine from different areas in the brain. We have a pathway, dopaminergic pathway. We also have the serotonin, wherein it is highly associated with also being calm. This is mostly being the target when we have anxiety. You will encounter this in the psychopharmacology in your biopsych since the serotonin most of the time is being addressed by either addressing the reuptake of the serotonin in order to increase its level by avoiding its reuptake. That's why in this example particularly, on this table, we are referring to problems in depression when we have an undersupply in serotonin. But we will not linger too much in the neurotransmitters, but at least we covered some of it in this introduction course. This is module Biology of Behavior. We're now going to talk about the sub-module Organization of the Nervous System in terms of its different divisions. But let us first talk about the nervous system. In its simplistic definition, according to its major functions, it is the major controlling, regulatory, and communicating system in the body. Without it, the harmony within the different systems in our body cannot be possible. That's why if we are brain dead, we might have the basic functioning of the vital organs, but our higher order processes may no longer be there, and therefore we can no longer say that we are truly living since there is no consciousness. But in terms of it, how our evolution allowed us to have this system operating within our body, we it can orchestrate how the different functions work together in a very harmonious manner, so that as an agent, as a living organism, we can navigate our environment, as well as internally it's operating like a machine that it no longer has to be voluntarily instructed. It already has its blueprint on how it will operate. It is already autom- automatic in terms of how homeostasis will be achieved in our system. That's how the nervous system can operate in a holistic manner in our body. Hand in hand with the endocrine system, the nervous system is responsible in, as I mentioned earlier, the regulation of our homeostasis. It has its normal levels of everything, and it monitors everything at the same time. It will notify us by experiencing symptoms or observing signs within our body to tell us that something is wrong. It has a lot of receptors all over our body internally and or also oriented externally, so that the monitoring can be possible. And once this monitoring is functioning, it will signal the central black box in our system to operate and signify that it requires further attention. So examples of the things that our nervous system is monitoring within our body include our blood pressure, our blood sugar, electrolytes, our hormones, our energy, our oxygen, proteins, and temperature, and so on and so forth. All these things are continuously being monitored even if we are asleep. It has to function. So this system within us are functioning even if it were involuntary. The nervous system is composed of the brain and the spinal cord, where in the spinal cord we have the nerves and our ganglia. The organs are composed of tissues. We have the nerve, the blood, and our connective tissue. And we also talk about the neurons and the glial cells as our main star of the show in the nervous system. So this is the initial division of the nervous system. We are referring to the central and the peripheral. As the name implies, we have the central nervous system composed of the brain and the spinal cord, coordinating on our movements, coordinating on our body orientation, and sensing what's in the environment and also what's inside. And then the peripheral nervous system is anything that is beyond the middle. Okay, we have the nerves connected to our spinal cord. The peripheral nervous system, now let's zoom in towards the PNS. We have the autonomic and the somatic. The main difference of autonomic and somatic is that somatic is innervated with voluntary movements, whereas autonomic is involved with involuntary functioning in our body, such as being innervated to our glands or our and also our internal organs. So what does it do in our involuntary functioning within the autonomic nervous system? This is very familiar analogy, the fight or flight response, and the rest and digest response. For the parasympathetic, this is the calming effects in our autonomic nervous system control, and sympathetic is the arousing, physiologically arousing reaction in our body. For example, when we perceive a threat in our environment, such as when there is a predator, well, in the modern times when we are asked to perform, then we can be physiologically aroused. Our pupils might be observed to be dilating, and our blood vessels are more constricted because it's trying to deliver more blood and oxygenation within our skeletal muscles. We need to supply that because we need energy in order to flee or maybe to fight. And then our respiratory rate will increase as well as the heart rate. It'll pump in coordination with harvesting more oxygen. So it'll try to supply more energy, more glucose, and more oxygen to the skeletal system. But notice in the sympathetic system, for the stomach and intestines, it's inhibiting the activity because it's not the time for digesting. The energy must be consumed in a more efficient way by supporting the skeletal muscles in order for us to flee or to fight. And then on the other hand, let's say you've managed to successfully flee from the predator, or you've managed to perform well in a task you're being evaluated in, then when you're in a relaxed state, your pupils will constrict relatively, it'll be smaller when you're relaxed. Your heart rate and your respiratory rate will be slower. It'll be in its resting state. And then your stomach and intestines, it'll be more active. It'll be stimulated in order to promote digestion, and the goal is to regain your energy by consuming more energy. And then your blood vessels are more dilated. It has no need to deliver the oxygen and the glucose rapidly into the cells because the constriction of the blood vessels can aid in putting the energy and the oxygen inside within the cells. But if it's dilated, it means it's relaxed. It's not trying to push those fuel towards the cells. So this is the bigger picture of what we talk about on how the nervous system is subdivided functionally into different parts.